Good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you, whatever time zone you may be joining us from, for this plenary panel at the 9th Annual World Ocean Summit. I'm Nick Hardman-Mountford, and I work for the Commonwealth Secretariat. And as someone who works at the interface between ocean policy and science, with the need to harmonise conservation and sustainable development priorities, I'm very much looking forward to talking with our panel today on the topic of monitoring and managing marine protected areas. Joining me for the discussion today, we have the Honourable Andre Perez, Minister for Blue Economy and Civil Aviation in Belize. Emmanuel Gonçalves, Board Member of the Oceano Azul Foundation. Dawn Wright, who is Chief Scientist at ESRI. And Corey Glickman, Vice President for Sustainability and Design at Infosys. Welcome to you all. Minister Perez, if I may come to you first. As custodians of the second largest barrier reef system in the world, and Commonwealth Blue Charter champions for coral reef protection and restoration, and also having committed to the IUCN target of 30% marine protection by 2030, please could I ask you to tell us about the significance of the ocean environment to Belize, and also about the journey Belize has been on over the past several years in establishing its network of marine protected areas, and its progress towards this 2030 target.
By all accounts, is that we will be meeting those targets well on our way by 2026, which is very, very important. As it is right now, our waters we are close as much as 24% of our blue space that is under conservation. So we're very much proud of that, and we're heading towards that 30 by 30 goal, and that we hail among the region as one of the first to reach that goal.
Thank you, Minister. And so with that 24% that's under protection, how do you balance or harmonise, maybe is a better term, the conservation priorities with the livelihood needs of local communities?
Certainly. One of the most important things that we want to highlight, and again, is the formation of what is the newly established the Blue Economy Ministry that I am leading. And in that, the first thing that we needed to identify is that creating an economic portfolio and calling it the blue economy, it called for us to follow that thin line of a balancing act of having conservation at the forefront, but at the same time growing in a very sustainable way. Our oceans, especially that we hail to hold the largest barrier reef in the entire Western Hemisphere, it is rich with natural resources, but we must care for it as well. Therefore, that balancing act, including everybody, all stakeholders, we're talking about our traditional fisher folks, we're talking about our NGOs as well, all of these, and government as well, and private sector involved, we find that balance as we move forward in the future and taking everybody into consideration.
Thank you, Minister. Emmanuel, if I could come to you next, as someone who's been involved in establishing quite a number of marine protected areas, what have you learned about what works and also what doesn't work in selecting and establishing marine protected areas?
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Well, there are a couple of things that we know that work. One is that marine protected areas need to have clear goals. We need to be clear about what are we doing with these instruments of management. Secondly, they have to be science-based. And today we have the necessary information to understand how to bring this science to policy. And we have the Marine Protected Areas Guide that was recently put out by this international network of scientists and practitioners that explains clearly what needs to be achieved in order for these areas to work. We also know that we need community engagement from start so that people understand why these areas are being put in place, why are we protecting the ocean. We also understand and we know from science that weak protection doesn't work. We need strong and full protection for the benefits to be the ones that are also deriving the most social and economic benefits. And so the types of marine protected areas that are out there, not all of them comply with these objectives. And then you create expectations that these instruments cannot fulfill if you don't have these levels of protection in place. We also know that we need effective enforcement. because without enforcement, these areas are not going to be effective. And that MPAs need staffing and need sustainable finance mechanisms. And these ones also many times lack, because when we are planning these areas, we don't take into consideration these needs. And of course, MPAs cannot be set alone in the ocean. They need to be set into a planning of the overall ocean, where they have a specific role to function as, if you want, the blue natural capital banks of our ocean, so that they can provide the most benefits both for the environment but also for our economies and our society. And these benefits need to be clearly shown and explained. So in a nutshell, I would say these are a bit the things that work when we establish marine protected areas.
Oh, that's great. That's very
some things
interesting.
that don't work. Yeah.
Keep going, please. Yeah.
No, I was just saying there are also some things that we know don't work, and it's also important to signal those, right? So we know that one-off initiatives don't provide protection. Just signing a law is not enough, because that's just the start of the process. Just going to a conference and make a declaration is very important, but it's not enough for these areas to function. The lack of scientific knowledge and community engagement is one of the main problems, as is the lack of funding and staffing. And of course, the compliance and the enforcement are issues. But I would say that with the information we have today, leadership is key. And this is where leaders that are showing the way of how to protect 30% of the ocean, I would say much before 2030, because this is what we need to do, are the ones which are going also to have the benefits from that protection.
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. That's so many good points there about what works and what doesn't. And one of the things that you said is about really needing to site those areas in the right place. Dawn, Esri is a world leader in geospatial technologies and satellite mapping. Geospatial technologies, satellite mapping, have revolutionized our ability to observe the planet. So how can these and other spatial technologies help us to better understand the ocean and choose which areas are best suited for marine parks?
Thank you, Nicholas. What we provide is a geographic approach to what we've already heard from my colleagues here. It's a geographic approach to implementing this balancing act and coming up with clear goals and implementing science to policy. In a way, what we provide is the software and services that are behind the MPA guide that Emmanuel just mentioned, which is at mpa-guide.protectedplanet.net. What we bring to the table is a way of integrating all the many types of data and information. These are multiple layers of information. It could be about the seabed. It could be about flora and fauna, especially in terms of species and habitats. It could be historical and cultural features, physical properties of the water column, commercial and recreational space use of these areas, such as fishing and shipping. And what is necessary here is a coupling of the actual data with analysis of that data to indeed site and manage these areas. And this is also coupled with compelling design so that we can more effectively plan and manage and communicate. So our software, as well as our services and our consulting, brings together the geographic approach in terms of the geoanalytics, the spatial analysis to create insight and understanding. There's geovisualization, which is a language through maps and visualization for communicating the content and the context of what we have within a particular marine protected area. The geodesign, to design something that is sustainable and inclusive for the future. The geocollaboration that Emmanuel mentioned in terms of engaging everyone, engaging all of the community. And geoaccounting, which is being able to spatially account for all of the factors, setting up balanced measures that are finance driven, but are driven by community and cultural values. So this is a holistic approach to planning, decision-making, operations, communicating, and most of this can be done within a web browser.
Wow, that's an incredible amount of information and things to think about, and to sort of have it all just available on the web. Sounds amazing. I mean, bringing all these things together, you know, the challenges and the challenges that marine park managers and policymakers are going to face with all this information. Is there something that systems perspectives and systems design thinking can teach us about the sorts of data we need? Corey, can you tell us a bit about this?
Absolutely, Nicholas. So if we think of what systems design is, it's how do we take disparate, what seem maybe unrelated systems, and how do they interconnect? So there's a classic example that environmentalists will often say, we're looking at climate and carbon change, and the marine side of it is saying we're looking at marine protected areas, we're looking at fisheries, we're looking at plastics, and often we're not coming together and looking at those systems at the same time. But the fact is, we do need to bring these together because the single most important number is how much carbon is happening, you know, across those systems. So we have to be able to have a way, such as Don was talking about, how can we actually measure and understand what's taking place across there? Because by looking at these systems designs, we can start looking at the economic factors, we can start looking at the biological factors, we could be looking at I might have said this before, the economic, social, the components of how technology impacts across there. Because for all of this to work, we know that there's an economy of shipping. We know that there is an economy of industry. 80% of all of the world's supply chain happens on the oceans, 70% of which is of the high value. And at the rate that we're going, we're going to see this increase by 250% over the next decade. So carbon and the ability to adjust or understand how carbon is impacting our areas and what are the technologies and areas that we can do to either mitigate or change behaviors or measure what's taking place is absolutely vital. So systems allow us to look at these multiple components, start making design decisions across their understanding impact and measurement, and therefore starting to make associated strategies to address this.
Fantastic. So that sort of is the sort of framework. What are the actual practical technologies then that we would bring in to monitor marine protected areas and bring these things together in a way, Corey? If you could just elaborate on that a bit further.
Certainly. So the first technologies have to do with things such as sensors, right? How many things can we actually use sensors in order to measure and automate collection of data? What we want to do with this, we can also apply areas such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, other ways that we can then take this data and start doing some unique models around predictive analytics that will allow us to make either simulations or forecast. So we can start making decisions not based off of schedule of saying something happens so often and therefore we need to alert and pay attention, but we can actually do condition-based that says based off of what's happening right now, based off of a certain circumstance, what can we do to get ahead and create what we would call a smart space that becomes very much attuned, that lets us to be more reactive or predictive so we can get ahead of the curve across there. Then what we also like to do along with the geospatial work that we've heard about is can we place this in models such as digital twins that allows us to look for anomalies, allows us to be able to both understand the relationship of the physical world to digital modeling and how those sides both impact across there. There are additional technologies that, as we know, everything today is on the cloud, right? So cloud itself has a huge footprint. And if we're using this in order to establish how do we take cloud technologies and make sure that they're running off of renewable energy sources? Because if we're doing this, then all of this work itself is not adding to the carbon footprint. So there's a myriad of technologies. The key is to be able to automate as much collection as possible, to be able to understand the data that's coming across there and do it in a predictive fashion so that we can stay ahead of the game.
Fantastic. So I mean, a real sort of fourth industrial revolution approach to managing our marine environments and all these sort of new technologies. But Dawn, I mean, is the key goal here of monitoring MPAs really just about counting fish and keeping the bad guys out? Or are there other factors that we really need to be taking into account that are more subtle, that often go overlooked, such as things like water quality and so on?
Mm-hmm. Yes, counting the fish and keeping the bad guys out, that certainly is key. But Corey made some wonderful points about the data being in the cloud, about using a digital twin approach so that we can forecast into the future with other factors, such as, for instance, the issue of pollution. So one specific example that I could give is how we need to monitor for many of these marine protected areas the issue of ocean pollution, particularly from land-based activities such as agricultural runoff, because a lot of these marine protected areas are actually within reach of these sources. Many of them are on the high seas, or hopefully will be designated for the high seas, but many of them are what we would call within the exclusive economic zones or territorial seas of our nations. And there is a specific project that is going on right now that is under the auspices of GEO Blue Planet. That's the Group on Earth Observations. Blue Planet is the coastal and ocean arm of GEO. And what they're doing is connecting ocean and coastal information with society, especially as part of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And they have a particular initiative at the forefront right now, which is taking usable data and information services to support informed decision-making toward Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is in part aimed at reducing the impacts of ocean pollution. So, and one of the problems here is the over-enrichment of coastal waters with nitrogen or phosphorus. This is called eutrophication, which in turn leads to increased growth and biomass of algae, which in turn adversely affects ecosystem balance and water quality. So not all countries have the capacity to map and to monitor this type of nutrient pollution in their coastal waters. So to address this gap, GEO Blue Planet has partnered with a team from ESRI, as well as the United Nations Environment Program, to develop a new statistical approach and a GIS workflow using what data nations already have, coupled with satellite observations that we make more usable for them, so that they in turn can report on eutrophication in their waters and identify potential hotspots of these trouble areas. And a big outcome of this is a dashboard that lets nations report on their progress through maps and charts. It can also be linked into a digital twin. The dashboard looks very similar to all of the coronavirus dashboards that we've seen around the world that report on the status of something that is of concern.
Right. So it's again sort of really sort of smart technologies to tackle this problem of eutrophication and the recognizing that the problems in the ocean are not just coming from the ocean but from the land as well, and we need to sort of factor that interface in. So Emmanuel, as your organization sort of set up a number of MPAs, are you sort of bringing these sort of digital technologies to monitoring this dashboard approach and these sort of next generation approaches to monitoring MPAs into your management, and are you finding them effective?
Yeah, so certainly yes. I think we are experiencing a merge between the technological maturity of some of the best approaches we have with the governance and the science approach applications to marine conservation in a way that we've never seen before. And applications such as the ones that we are talking now, for instance, we are able now to address things like the illegal fishing, transshipment of fisheries in the ocean, understanding the behavior of individual vessels through satellites. All this is very, very important, especially when we're talking about protecting 30% of the ocean. Most of these areas are going to be far from shore, are going to be very difficult to reach by traditional means. And so we'll have to have these collaborations in place in order for these areas to be, again, producing the results that we expect and not just lines on maps. And at the Oceano Azul Foundation, what we'll be trying to bring in the different approaches that we have, first is this clear notion of why do we need marine protected areas? And we need marine protected areas because we have a problem. And the problem is our economic model, which is extracting too much resources from the ocean and is polluting the waters of the ocean. And we need to reverse this. And we know that marine protected areas are one of the best tools we have to quickly heal the ocean, to allow the ocean to recover. And with that recovery, there is a sort of new economic activities and economic avenues that we can bring to the table of instead using an extractive approach to biodiversity. We use a valuation approach to that biodiversity. And by valuing those economic aspects, you're also creating jobs. And so at the same time that you're getting rid of the problem, which is the over-extraction, the mentality of just scooping up everything from the ocean, you're at the same time creating jobs which are directly to the new economy, the economy of the future. Biotechnology is an obvious example here, where these new things that our society needs to do the transformation to a sustainable model, from biomaterials to medicine to other areas of biotechnology where these new jobs and this new economy is moving. MPAs are the banks of all this. You know, without an intact ocean, nothing is possible here. And so by protecting the ocean, by having these areas with this nature which is recovered and with an intact nature, then all these avenues are possible, and we are able to do this transformative change that we need to do very fast because, and this is the good news, science tells us clearly what will happen if we continue to do things our ways. If we continue to do things as we are doing now, we are going to end up in a very bad place.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So coupled with the technological advances, we need this mindset shift around natural ecosystems and valuing them as assets, as you said. So, but just coming back to the technologies a bit, Minister Perez, this all sounds very exciting and advanced, but are such technologies in reach for small states like Belize? Are they practical to deploy for you? Or what kinds of barriers to adoption might you find?
Certainly. But before I answer your questions and what you're directing, it certainly relates to what Don has been mentioning as well as Emmanuel. But in government, there's one thing we learned, that no government of the day that will move forward that does not take science-based information into consideration will never move forward. And that is what we want to make clear from our government standpoint, that to move forward is that we get that information from science-based information and put it into place, and recognizing what are our problems. And as Don rightfully spoke, and you to quote her, she said, the bad guys. And we tend to just focus on the bad guys of illegal fishing, transboundary fishing, illegal transboundary fishing as well, and talking about the runoffs as well as the great amount of agriculture sector that's affecting and growing very quickly, in particular the region in Central America. That is also a major factor affecting our waters. Now, as a small country, we believe that we are leading in the way to find a balance of extending our MPAs as we're talking about, and bearing in mind that agriculture is something that produces runoffs by way of the rivers. Our small country that we are, we have over about 22 rivers that empty out into the Caribbean Sea, and as Emmanuel pointed out, most of those MPAs are very close to the coast. However, what we are doing is just not enough. We have to use technology. In particular, our fisheries department we do have what we call the SMART, which is the use of the spatial monitoring and reporting tool, which has been very effective in assisting us. If there's more to be done, certainly. But of course, the lack of the resources that we are always aiming for, that finance that is always needed, that sustainable finance that we are always aiming for, is very much important. And finally, I think another important factor is how do we bridge this technology that is available for us and to work along with our fisher folks. And I can name a more specific one where we have a traditional artisanal fisher folks that have in Belize for generations. I think they are the only ones in the region that still do sailboat fishing. We have been able to collaborate with them to involve as much as 85 of these sailboats where they have been, we are tagging them, and then through the satellite, we can track them where they are doing. That is an excellent way to gather information. It has been working. We would love to do more, but this is where we need to partner with many different other organizations that exist out there. But the most important thing is to have a government of the day that is proactive, that is willing to work. The collaborative effort that we always do is important.
Fantastic. So proactive and collaborative governments that take science seriously in the policy making. That's a real call to arms, isn't it? But recognizing some challenges as well. It was interesting to hear that you've sort of been able to really engage sort of these sailboat fishermen in collecting that data and putting trackers in there and working with them. Dawn, sort of, does that story resonate with you and some of your experiences as well? I mean, how marine science and data capacity can be strengthened, particularly in developing nations, through the engagement of local communities?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think this engagement with local communities and respecting and incorporating their way of knowing and their way of logging and seeing and organizing their environment, that is starting to change how we do science. So it's a very, very important part of making sure that science is strengthened and expanded, not just through a Western perspective, maybe a European or North American perspective, but through the perspective of the people who actually live in these areas. This, I think what we've been talking about really is citizen science as well. Even for Minister Perez, there is a beautiful citizen science project that's going on in Belize right now. And it is in cooperation with Dr. Timothy Hawthorne's lab at the University of Central Florida, and they've been deploying drones. We haven't talked about drones yet, but drones are very important for marine protected area monitoring and managing as well. And they have been incorporating this type of imagery and the other types of observations from drones, working with various communities throughout Belize over the last couple of years. And they've also been not only working with local fishermen, local community leaders, but they have brought with them young students from their university. So it's that type of two-way collaboration and meeting of the minds and cultures that is extremely important. And these types of opportunities result in very good data, very usable data that governments, that scientists can use, that scientists can even publish on. So I've had a similar experience in American Samoa with my old lab at Oregon State University. But I hope that this is the wave of the future for science and for MPA management.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Dawn. I also want to go back to the previous point Emmanuel made about the new economics needed and how we resource these marine protected areas. And coming to you, Minister Perez, again, there's, Belize has been quite innovative in the way it's looked at financing the marine protected areas and its blue economy as a whole. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
When it comes to financing that you're talking about, that is important that we always move forward, that we want to learn more always in keeping about sustainable finance for effective MPA management. That is also important. There's no way we can move forward without seeing how best we can effectively manage our MPAs. We are growing. We want to expand the MPAs and reaching as much as 30% we discussed. But how do we get there? We cannot get there if we do not learn how to be be able to handle what is sustainable finance. And that is also something that we must take into consideration, is to having the capacity. We have a great, for example, in the Ministry of Blue Economy, we have a great staff, tremendous good human resources, but also the capacity is there. But to go out there, to monitor, for surveillance to occur, getting all the proper equipment in there, vessels for intervention, for patrolling all of these waters here, certainly that there is we need to learn more about sustainable finance. And that's the only way we believe is going to be effective, to have effective NPA management.
Yeah, fantastic. And of course, you launched your blue bond now as well, or in the process of doing so. So Emmanuel, you sort of making the economics work for marine protected areas is something you've already alluded to. Can you elaborate more on that? And in your experience, what are the most effective ways of actually doing that, of making MPAs maybe even self-financing in the way they can move forward?
Sure, a couple of things. Some related with the current economic instruments, so to say. It's possible now to show that the shark is much more worth alive than that through direct use, like tourism. And so by bringing these numbers to the table, by showing this to fishermen, by showing this to decision makers, then this can change the equation towards marine protection, because in the end, you'll have a much stronger economy if you protect the ocean rather than if you continue just exploring the old way. So that there are these concrete examples that we need to bring up. But of course, then there is the issue of how do you fund the surveillance, how do you fund the staffing, how do you fund the implementation of these marine protected areas. And this is where the notion of blue natural capital needs to be strongly put out in the equation and come to the decision making and the cost benefit analysis that decision makers do when they look at the MPAs into the future. Because this is where, if you incorporate all the benefits, let's talk about carbon, of course. We know that there will be a carbon market coming our way, and MPAs are, again, carbon deposits, because all the biomass that you have there, all the ecosystem services that are produced by these MPAs are going to be really valuable if nature is still intact and is still there in a market where carbon is going to be valued. But it's more than that, because blue natural capital is beyond just carbon. Blue natural capital is this notion that with an intact nature, we'll have a healthier economy. Because it's the only way, because the old way, our way today, is that we are hurting the economy, we are hurting societies, because we have less nature, and because we are degrading that nature. So there are a couple of mix of things that we can bring and we need to bring to the table. Some are short-term, direct, to the heart of the current economics. Others are changing this model of using blue natural capital as the currency of the future and bringing this to the mainstream economics. And this is where lots of thinking is being done and lots of concrete tools are already being tested. And blue bonds is just an example of this.
Yeah, great, thanks. And Corey, just wanted to come to you on a sort of similar note. Is there a role for private industry in building these the financial and business case for marine protected areas, do you think? And what might that look like?
So it's a really interesting question, because we're already seeing this model take place of what is that balance between what is considered to be a public responsibility or government level responsibility versus, say, a private industry. And it's going to be a mix of both. That's the short answer. But what we see is this: when programs are deemed to need to be led by government-led controls because they have to be measured, that they have to be regulated, which they should be. We know that governments work at a certain pace. It depends on which country or which society that it is. However, we know what will get done. So let's take decarbonization or protection of areas. We know that that will happen through regulatory issues, and it will take place. However, if we also allow for private industry to take leads or to own parts of this, we might see quicker innovations take place, because there's definitely a commercial aspect along with hopefully also a good for society aspect. equivalent areas, if we think about on the land again, look at a Tesla and what they would do to say if they were in charge of decarbonization, and what kind of technologies and what kind of economy they could drive versus, say, your local government saying we're responsible for decarbonization. I think the real question that comes out with any of these is that once you move things into the private industry and you allow for, say, this greater rapid pace of innovation, you're now also allowing for information that maybe they've not been allowed to handle before, or should they be allowed to handle? So, and we're not quite sure of those consequences with privacy. So the point is this: we trust our government's institutions to protect our rights and to be able to drive a consistent movement towards where it should be. We could expect higher innovation to take place with a combination of private sectors because they're economically motivated and other motivations. But in order for them to be effective, you're now going to give them access to information that they have not had before. And quite frankly, there's no controls put in place globally to say what do they do with that or how can it be accounted for. Plus, private institutions are much more apt to say we're going to add additional complexities or systems to how we do things. We will be the first to drive cryptocurrency. We will be the first to drive blockchain, which are very important technology concepts, but we don't know the full consequences of these areas. So it's going to have to be a balance between the two to get the speed of this to take place, because that's the only way innovation will take through. But at the same time, this idea of how the data is used, how do we validate that data? The last point that I would bring across is that the importance of science is absolutely paramount. And at a government level, we can say that science is easily recognized and accessed across there. When you get to private industry, they will probably take the benefits of what science has learned, but they will do what I call practical calculus. They will simplify it in order to get to inventions quickly. And they will say, you can trust the science, but we can't validate that they're actually doing this. But that's an important movement, because how do you get the Sal Fisher crowd to be able to do this? They need the practical calculus side that says, I can trust the science, but I can actually invent without being a deep scientist. And how do we make that link back and forth? So they're both very important parts of the equation.
Yeah. So thank you very much to all our panelists for their engaging answers today and the discussion we've had, rich discussion. Key takeaways for me have been the need for really combining these digital technologies with government, private sector, and scientists all working together in collaboration, the need for new business models and the need for new paradigms in the way we value the environment, all as essential factors in how we manage and monitor marine protected areas. Thank you very much.